Hey, you. Welcome to the What Reading Podcast, the no boring zone where we get you all excited about books that are worth reading.
On the What Reading Podcast, you get some unbiased take on books, juicy scoops of what runs through the minds of your favorite author. You can call us your virtual book connoisseurs that help you filter through the many books out there and let you know the ones worth reading.
On this podcast, we talk about different book genre. We do not discriminate, from fiction to non-fiction, poetry, biographies, memoirs, you name it, so long as it is written by an author of African descent and project our very own authentic African stories. You can count us in. So welcome on board and thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Hello, listeners. Hi, everybody. It's so beautiful to have you on yet another episode of What Reading Podcast. My name is Toby. I'm your host for today, and with me is my usual suspect, Sheyi Adebi. And hi, Sheyi. Do you want to say something to the house?
Yeah, I believe the use of suspects is in a positive way. So yeah.
Oh, well. My partner in crime, my partner in all things literary
I
books
believe
or all things African literature, It's an absolute delight to be here again with you today. And it's episode 4, season 2. Wow! I'm so excited.
yeah.
We've actually come a long way. I'm excited. I did not know we were going to
Gradually.
come this far because this year has just been such a roller coaster, I must say. There was one time our audience literally went cricket on everybody because I don't know, for some interesting reasons, some not things were just not hard enough. And we must admit that it actually takes a lot to put together the production of every single episode. And we're just telling our guests who will be introducing very shortly that this is actually a labor of love. And I mean, it's something which we're quite passionate about, and we do it all for the culture. And the least we can get in return is some level of support, some subscriptions, some feedback, ratings, and referring this podcast to all of your friends and family and your enemies and every single person. So it's an absolute delight to be here again with you guys, and I will be introducing our guest today. It's an absolute honor to have with us today Michael, who is the author of so many books that are well known within the Nigerian literary space or in the African literature space, if I'm being honest. Hello, Michael. Lovely to have you here.
Hi. Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure connecting, and I look forward to the conversation on this episode.
Amazing. Hi, Shay. Do you want to say something to our guest today? Let the audience feel how excited you are, like the upbeat and what the conversation today is going to look like. So I could use some very positive energy here right now. So please tell us, what are
Yeah,
you looking
so
forward to on this episode?
I'm looking forward to know what inspired the story. It's quite interesting because of all of the elements that the story tries to capture, right? I like the cover page. I like the maple leaves that are floating around, and I believe that the background image is of the city that was mostly mentioned in the
Don't let
book,
the cat out of the
which
bag yet,
happens to be the
because
city
people
that the
don't
author
even know what
resides
book we
in.
are
But yeah,
talking about.
that's why I didn't say the name of the city anyways. But yeah. So
But,
I
but
really can't
anyone,
wait to get into this. I have loads of questions for you, and I'm sure that you're ready to help us and help our listeners understand. And once they're done listening, get out to the nearest Irving Heights bookstore or the nearest bookstore and grab a copy of this book.
and on Amazon too. And
Yeah.
I think if we have amazing students of history or people who are quite familiar with geography, they can almost guess the book in focus. And of course, if you're a lover of literature, because she already gave a few cues early on, you mentioned maple leaves and all of that, and it's that. Should I call this country that is known for maple leaf the other capital city of Nigeria, or like an extension of Nigeria after the other one. But of course, lately, when you mention anything that has to do with, the Jackpot phenomenon, and for those who don't know what Jackpot means, Jackpot is like a local term in Nigeria that we used to describe the current exodus and the current wave of immigration or migration of our people to other countries, to other European or American countries with greener pastures. And so, without beating around the bush too much, the book we're actually focusing on, because I mentioned earlier that our guest has written quite a number of books, and what we're focusing on today is his latest novel, which is titled "Leave My Bones in Saskatoon." Yes, I got the pronunciation of that right. Yay! Trust me, before this episode, I had to go on, YouTube and Google pronunciation to make sure that, someone actually enunciates the word and spellings correctly. I mean, it's quite a mouthful. So, exciting. And like Shoyi mentioned, we're all really keen to know what actually inspired this book, which is like not such a far-fetched question. I'm sure you've gotten that a number of. In addition to that question of what inspired this book, right, it would be great to know your own Jackpot story, if that makes sense, because I'm very much aware you're based in Canada, or actually in Saskatoon, which is where this particular book was set. So yeah, over to you, Michael. Love to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks, Toby and Sheyi. That's a really good question about the inspiration for the book. And quite frankly, like you mentioned, like I also jackpot, and maybe not too long ago, right? And I realized when I got here, um, and I wouldn't say it was lies, like nobody really lied or painted any picture to me that wasn't. They just weren't talking, like they just weren't saying things. And so when I got here and I realized, oh wow, um, why are you just telling me this now? Like, like why am I just finding out this? Maybe it's my fault. I should have done more homework. I'm the one who is leaving, right? Who is moving, so I should have done more homework, more research. But then coming here and realizing that wow, only for those who have done the research, even for those who may have been told, right? Um, the reality when you're on ground is very different from when someone tells you. Like when you experience it, right? It's different from when someone tells you. So, and I thought, like, you know what? I think as a writer, as a human being, really, I think I owe it to people. And disclaimer, like, I would never, ever, ever be among those people who will go and do a YouTube video and say, "Oh, Canada is tough. Don't come, don't come." By all means, come. I don't belong to that school of thought. But hey, guys, just beware that it may not be easy.
Mm,
And I thought like that's the sentiment I wanted to convey in the book. Like,
mm,
you can't be prepared enough, but I also didn't want to be one of those people who didn't share my story, and
mm,
so may contribute to the deception that is out there about how that process of settling in can be. And I'm not saying everybody has a bad experience. I mean, I
Mhm.
have heard of cases of people who even get a job from Nigeria before they arrived here. So they're not going to
yeah.
come here and be looking for work and not going through all that stress, but
Mm,
still, there's a lot about living in a country that is not yours. There's a lot. And it's not just about having a job. There's a lot. And I know like recently, I had a recent experience of someone else, you know,
mm,
um, and I saw like maybe the excitement when they first got a job, and then lately, you know, that feeling like, okay, but in Nigeria, I was doing better than this. Like, what am I really doing here? Lately I've started picking that in our conversations. Like, okay,
mm,
why am I why am I doing this? I would never have done this in Nigeria. Like, I won't even do this for my parents. Like, why am I coming to do it for
mm,
someone else? So at some point that reality sinks in, and you start to question yourself and your decision. But ultimately, like I said, I'm never one of those who will say, "Oh, don't do it, don't do it." I look back here, stories about what's going on in Nigeria, and sometimes I wonder how come we still have people there? Like everybody
we're,
should go left
we're
by
still
now.
here. We're still here. We're still here.
Uh, you're one of the 1% or the few percentile of people that are fiercely loyal to. I wouldn't even say it's an issue of loyalty or patriotism or anything, but okay, kudos to you. You know how I feel
Yeah.
about this stuff.
Uh,
But yeah,
we're
for the
building
purpose
we're
of
building this
context,
country for
right?
all of you.
Not true. Okay, guys, thank you so much for sharing, Michael. It was really interesting hearing your perspective and finding out the story behind this book. And I think that one of the relevance or one of those things that make literature such um, a valuable form of art is how it's actually like a reflection of our society. And oftentimes, especially when it comes to Nigerian and African literature, most people tend to like explore historical side of things, forgetting the fact that there are actually a lot of contemporary and modern topics or subject matters that are worth being explored. So your book is actually a breath of fresh air, if I'm honest, because it actually explores like something timely, something recent that actually affects or
Mm-hmm.
touches the life of every young people in this age and time. And just to establish a bit of context for those who probably don't know too much about the book we're talking about, like I mentioned earlier, it's titled "Leave My Bones in Saskatoon." It's like the latest release by Michael Afenfia, and I'm going to try to see if I can read the blog of the book synopsis behind, because I'm trying as much as possible not to give away spoilers. You know what that means. The idea is to get you people to care enough to want to read this book. I mean, what we do on this podcast is review the books that are worth reading. Okay, so pardon me. Hopefully, I did not murder the name of the main character because it's very interesting. But I would just attempt it. So this is through the eyes of Owoi
Oh,
Owoicho, a television presenter. Okay, I'm not from Benue, pardon me. A television presenter seeking a better life for himself and his family. Leave My Bones in Saskatoon spans to cultures and continents. It is honest, heartfelt, and enlightening. The story begins with Owoicho's good news. He can't wait to tell his family that their permanent residency application to Canada was successful. But while he was in Abuja, happy about this breakthrough, somewhere in the outskirts of Makurdi, a dark and troubling event threatens to torpedo all the plans he and his wife Ene made to family to. So yeah, that's what we have about the book from the blog at the back of the cover. And just to add a bit of more context, it's for anyone who is looking to reading something refreshing around something modern and quite recent around the wave of Africans or Nigerians in general exploring greener pasture in other parts of the world. And this is definitely a read. Shay, I know you mentioned earlier that you've
yeah.
got lots of questions, so get it started.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would start from Nigeria actually. The book was set out first in Nigeria prior to the eventual migration and all of the things that happened. And one thing that I saw was the emphasis on news from home, right? And
Mm,
how news at home as well as news from home, and how not just the Nigerians in Canada looking out for news from home, but how news from home was sort of a propellant for some of the actions that then went on to occur in the book. So I would say that how much of that do you think is like the reality for Nigerians in the diaspora? Like when they hear, because looking at some of the incidents that were portrayed, especially around the North Central and some of the issues that occurred.
Name the
How
issue,
how
Sheyi.
how
We all
much
know
of
it. Kidnapping, bandits,
no,
and
but no, it
the
wasn't.
whole
So it wasn't
Fulani
kidnapping in
headsmen.
this case. It wasn't kidnapping. It was more banditry, right? Although
Yeah,
there are
it's
still
a
questions
combination
that
of
there are still
everything.
yeah, no. But my mind, the way my mind has walked around this book, I'm beginning to ask questions because there are a lot of things that weren't said towards the end, right? As to whether that attack was actually premeditated or it was just an accidental attack. I'm sure you understand why I'm asking that question. Why I'm referring to the possibility of it being premeditated based on some of the things that were uncovered much later on, right? But again, I would stay on course to saying that would you say that that's the reality of the Nigerians in diaspora in terms of news from home? Do they always just get hit by bad news or something that's occurred or the elections were bad or this has happened, that has happened? And what's the general feel or general pulse of Nigerians in diaspora about news from Nigeria?
Before
I
you
don't
ask me
have.
that question, sorry, I wanted to say something, Sheyi. And it's a little bit to just make this a bit more topical and let's have an enlightening conversation here. And disclaimer, Sheyi is a diet optimist. Let's we'll get that started. And the way you are painting this thing is like it's almost as if you're trying to make excuses and you're like, oh, maybe it's premeditated.
No,
And
I'm
all.
not
I'm like,
making
no,
excuses. I'm
guys,
not making excuses.
obviously
I'm
we're
following the
victims of
trail. I'm
circumstance and
following the trail of the book. I'm following the revelations that occurred
I don't agree with
towards
you,
the end of
Shay.
the
No,
story.
Nigeria,
And it's
like every single thing that Michael painted in that book is actually the reality of what happens from home. And even for someone who is a migrant in another country, I can say for sure that, there's this renewed interest in keeping up with happenings from Nigeria, right? And sometimes you're like, oh, is it really as bad as it's portrayed in the media? But in all fairness,
no, it's
when you actually
bad.
get the first-hand account of your friends, your family, and sometimes it's almost as if you're kind of like shielded or you are not really in touch with that reality because you're able to create this bubble for yourself. Good for you. But the real fact is that those that are back at home, I
It's
personally
not that
feel
bad.
very, very agitated when it comes to issues like this.
So, like,
Because
it's not that bad. So, I
I
think
run a
Michael,
business, right? You know what happened to
yeah,
us in August
I'm
and how
aware.
Nigeria happened to one of my
I'm
staff,
aware, but it's
and it
still
was
not
such
that
a
bad.
painful loss. It is bad,
Yeah,
Shay. And
I'm
I don't
aware, but
know
it's still
how
not
you
that
still
bad.
manage to be very optimistic. Maybe
Because I believe
because
in
you
Nigeria.
managed to be able to. No, we all know that's not just the entire story.
No,
I
You're
you
just
know
believe in
painting one
Nigeria.
character.
when you leave, like there was a time I used to live and work in Lagos.
Mhm.
Okay.
And then at that time in Nigeria, there was a lot going on in the Niger Delta region.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mhm.
Bombing pipelines, like the kidnapping people. There were lots of things
Militancy.
going on there. Yeah. So whenever I was driving, I used to join the staff bus to work from the mainland to the island every morning. And every time on the news, it was once the news came on, because we'd be in the bus and then the morning news would come on the radio. And it was, oh, in the Niger Delta, they have done this, they have killed someone, they've kidnapped someone. So it was almost like there was a war going on. If you were in that bus in Lagos every morning
Mm-hmm.
listening to the news. And then I
Mm-hmm.
had the opportunity of going back home, to the Niger Delta, Yenagoa to be precise, to work. And then
And you
I
saw that was
realized it was different. Like, okay, I thought I was going to a war zone. So
exactly.
I was like, where's all these stories I kept hearing on the news every day? So I guess Shay's point that sometimes when you live, okay, I get both of your points. When you live in it,
Better.
you become, because there's a word that you become toughened. So you
Mm.
don't realize that you're not sleeping at night because you're worried. You just heard of somebody being kidnapped or, somebody's car being stolen. When I was in Nigeria, quite frankly, at some point I stopped going into a hair salon to cut my hair because I'd heard of stories of people who went to cut their hair and then they stole their phones or they were attacked. So I'll bring the barber to the house to cut my hair. You understand? Like, so, but what options do you have? Like, maybe I could afford to bring someone home to come and cut my hair. How many people can
Yeah.
afford to do that? But you have to cut your hair anyway. So you will go
Yeah.
into those places and life
Mm-hmm.
will go on. And after a
Mm-hmm.
while, it almost feels like it's normal. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, okay, look, so, and again, the other day I was I think it was yesterday, I was on social media and I saw this guy pleading on behalf of somebody who had gone to his house to steal. And so the people, maybe his neighbors or whoever, this happened because I saw the video, right? So they beat the guy up, and this is like jungle justice. And it
Mm-hmm.
was so acceptable that this guy would post it on social media that this guy came to steal in my house and we beat him up. Like, you live in the UK, like, would that happen in the
So
UK?
that's
Like, why
such a
would
bizarre thing.
like
Yeah.
why would you beat
Yeah.
Complete
somebody up?
nightmare.
So if I think we'll still come back to the question, but one thing I was going to point out, which you also kind of referenced in the book, is where Oicho had spoken to his friend, and he said his car was never broken into in Nigeria. The first time his car was ever broken into was there in Canada. He said he had never seen, young people vape outside of school. The first time he was ever going to see it was in Canada. And, he mentioned a couple of vices, and what that was for me is the fact that, a few days ago, I saw on Twitter where someone put up a video of somewhere in Atlanta, if I recall correctly, and, where on the streets we had people literally moving like zombies because of the drug
Mm,
culture that is there, right? We're all here just before we did our own NSAS, there was the George Floyd issue, and there
yeah.
continues to be the issue of the murder of young black males, right? Which still hasn't stopped. And if you tune into local, pick a country, America, Germany, wherever it is. Even in the UK, there's currently a knife violence issue where people still have issues with burglars, like high celebrities, footballers have issues with of burglars, going into their houses to steal jewelry, steal valuables. A friend of mine was recently attacked in the UK just a few days after her birthday. So the point in all of this is, what I always try to say is, I agree that we have issues, but I want to believe that baselining, we are not worse off compared to many other nations. Many other nations have better media representation, and so, but I don't think it's as bad as sometimes the media tries to portray. But again, like my point, my question was, do you think that the general feel of those in diaspora is, looking out for news, and do you think that the news that often gets to them is more of the bad news than the good news? And what do you just generally feel as the vibe of you starting off the book with that story?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Like, so I'm just one person, and it will only be my perspective. But
Yeah.
from my experience, and maybe other people too would experience the same thing, right? So you leave Nigeria, you Japan, you whatever, with a lot of expectation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then when you get there and you realize that, oh, some of these things, they're just lofty ideal, that can never be actualized. Or like you
Mm-hmm.
said, you leave Nigeria because you're scared of banditry, or whatever it was, some religious crisis or whatever it is that has driven you out of Nigeria, right? And then you
Mm-hmm.
move and let's not make this about Canada, right? You move to the US with your family. And then one day you go to the cinema to watch a movie, the new Black Panther movie or whatever movie is out, right? And then there's some random, senseless shooting in the cinema. And you
Exactly.
see that happen all the time. Or even your kids just go to school. You drop your kids off in school. And then a fellow student in class brings out a gun and shoots at everybody. And you hear those stories in the US all the time. But like you said, it hasn't deterred people from moving to the US because they know
Mm-hmm.
that my child can go to school and not come back home because somebody brings out a gun and shoots him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when these things start to happen and you experience it, there's a part of you that starts to say, I wish Nigeria can. Like,
Was
you don't know how much I was invested in the elections that just happened in Nigeria. Because a part of me was like, if this election works well and maybe I can come back home and I don't have to endure some of the things. I mean, it's real. Racism is real. You know,
mm-hmm.
some of the things you mentioned, depending on what country you live in, they're real. People are
Mm-hmm.
attacked in the train, stay in the trains. Like all these things happen, and then when you have those experiences, you wonder, like, if my country was good, what thing are they do here? You know, like if our
What am I
leaders
looking
can
for
get
here?
this right, what thing are they do here? So you
Yeah.
every up and you want to hear good news about is it getting better? Is something getting is there some governor who is doing greatly that I want to come to Osun State and live because I hear that it's better there? You know, so that news, becomes your oxygen. And for me, it was at least, and I will come every morning. I wake up or night. I want to watch channels, news. I want to see some YouTuber. I want to see know what's going on in my country. And again, it's the only way that I stay
Mm-hmm.
connected, right? Like my Nigerianness. I'm sorry, I'm not like other people. Really, like my Nigerianness can never be taken away from me. So and this is my own way of staying connected. And if you even look at the statistics of people who like the social media influencers um, in Nigeria, back home in Nigeria, I watch Daddy Freeze sometimes, and I see a lot of his listeners live in the abroad. Maybe the facilities,
Yeah.
whatever, they're available for that sort of engagement to happen. But a lot of the people
Mm-hmm.
who consume and patronize our content creators, influencers back home in
Yeah.
Nigeria,
Entertainment
and
industry.
Nigerians who
Yeah.
live outside Nigeria.
Yes.
All of the stars and musicians who are doing great and haven't been back home in Nigeria because they are touring all the states in the US and the UK are able to do that because of the Nigerian population in these
Nigerian
countries
population. Yes.
exactly that have helped to boost their career and make them
Mm-hmm.
international.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I'm in Nigerian and I've moved to the US, I would still rather um, buy a concert ticket and go and watch Tiwa Savage than go and watch a Taylor Swift. I mean, this is just me, you know. So that connection, for most people, that connection never goes away. And the longer you stay out, the more longing you have. And a lot of people will say, me, never, ever. The moment I step here, don't do. I know that, but it's not true. It's not as easy as that. Like something keeps
Yeah,
pulling you.
I totally agree with you that being far away from home just elicits this feeling of nostalgia, and you begin to long for what used to be, and absolutely nothing feels like home. That I must establish. But I love how this book actually explores the subject matter of immigration, and I'll tell you why. Because when you begin to dig deep into that particular topic, not today that people have been jackfiring. Like even for many of the countries that we all aspire towards, or the supposed destination for greener pastures, are products of some form of, movement of people from one place to another. That makes sense. And there are actually researches available to back it. And so again, when you dig deep into the origin of time, into the origin of locations and the people, the migration has always been like the way of life. It's not something new. And so my question would be
Wow.
around what you wanted to leave your readers with. I know there are so many themes that you explored. There was the issue around trust. The book was really like a full blown, melting pot of so many issues that affect every human in this age and time. So off the top of my head, I'm just very curious to know what key message you wanted to leave everyone with, or it was just a case of, providing like an a la carte and you want people to take one out of it beyond just using telling the story against the backdrop of what's migration. Was that something else you wanted us to leave home with? Because again, I got confused at the end when I turned the last page. I was like, okay, so interesting story, but varying perspective. What stance should I take concerning this issue and what actually happened to characters?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think before I go into that, could respond? You mentioned that longing as well, and I remember like I'd been in Canada for a few months before I drank or saw like um a kind of malt, like um Nigerian Maltina, whatever it was. And I can remember how excited I was. Like, my God, I can drink Maltina again, you know? So those little things, they seem like, oh, this is little, but it's a lot, right? Being able to eat bully and fish, like those things
What
that,
happened,
that
guy?
the things that make you miss home and remember the nostalgia
Yeah,
you speak
yeah,
about, yes. And yeah, to your question, I think like beyond that desire to inform
yeah,
people, I also wanted to encourage people to be open. Like people have been coming, living in Nigeria for, like you said, for even migration is as old as time itself, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
in the case of Nigeria, like, and you don't have to be a writer to tell these stories. But why don't we share these stories,
Exactly.
even to family members? And this wasn't even a Nigerian, right? I remember I met somebody from Pakistan, and we were talking, and then he told me he was in Canada for 10, because like his parents were rich. I think his parents are professors. I don't know what it was they did in their back home in their country. And then um he moved to Canada, and he said for 10 years he didn't tell his parents that he was a cab driver. For
Mm,
10 years he kept that secret to himself. So um that desire to encourage people to share, you know, to and I hope that that message comes across. Like it's a new
yeah.
adventure we have embarked on. There's nothing to be ashamed of, like there's nothing to be ashamed of if you have to
I
start
don't
all over.
blame people who do not want to share because again, the book was really familiar to me because so many of the things that some of the characters had to go through. I mean, the several culture shock. I only just came to the UK in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, and I had those different levels of phases of that shock, and it was a lot to grapple with. And there were times when you who do you begin to tell? Because of course you're in a new environment, you probably aren't forging the kind of relationship or a community that you can genuinely feel vulnerable enough to talk to. Isn't that your family and friends that perhaps are back at home are seriously rooting for you or probably said all the prayers in of all the psalms to you for you and are praying for you that you begin to call back and now begin to tell them that oh yes it's freezing here, oh I'm having winter depression, oh the weather here is so hot, oh I can't sleep well because there's some insomnia that is being induced as a result of the fact that my body isn't adjusting. And so again, for me, I don't think it's a question of people not really wanting to share or being open. I also think that it's a question of a cultural what's the word now? Limitation that makes us feel that we want to keep up appearances and you want to give people a
Yeah, I'll
perception
say
of
how far
you.
my
Because
guy,
even
how
back in
far
the
my
day,
guy.
when someone is whooping your ass or things that happen behind closed doors, Nigerians are not the most open set of people. There's a lot of silence culture amongst
Mm-hmm.
our people. As Africans, our culture is not one that
Yeah,
actually encourages people to be vulnerable, right? And so when you now find yourself in a new space, new country where you're doing something that is quite demeaning and not necessarily, because there are
Mm-hmm.
nuances. So actually, when you say, oh, it's demeaning, right? They would also tell you that, oh, such kind of labor actually help you understand that there's dignity in labor, that it helps you to actually be resilient and everything. And when you begin to explain that concept to friends where, hourly pay and all of those concepts seem alien to them, they probably would not understand. So it
No,
only
in
just makes
Luth.
sense that, oh, you continue to what they call in Yoruba foriti and hope that you get your big break pretty soon. I know for many international students that actually come to the UK, for example, on study visa, for many of them, probably
Mm-hmm.
they only manage to pay like their deposit and hoping that they get a side job that they can do and eventually be able to. They come into this country and most of the employers are probably just looking out for what's the word now, the experience that is relevant to that context. And nobody wants to take or want to understand that, oh, there's a life outside of the UK, that people had thriving careers where they are coming from. Some of these people are the same, or maybe there's also the language barrier they have to grapple with and all. So I could go on and on. And I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate and probably share from my
No,
own
yeah,
perspective as well.
I totally get you. The only thing I would say is that, like, there are levels to sharing, right? There are
Mm-hmm.
levels to sharing, and that's why it's important to share. And I'll keep encouraging people to share. Like, I'm here as well. I get your point. I'm not gonna,
Mm-hmm.
every time I have a conversation with my mother or my brothers or my sisters, I'm being very woe betide me, that would be very disheartening for them. But the thing
Yeah.
about not sharing is, like I said, there are levels to sharing, right? For some people, it's isolation. So if I am not doing well in Canada because I feel isolated, like I'm not able to make friends, nobody is talking to me, and that's what I'm dealing with, sharing that experience would make somebody else realize, oh, if I see somebody who isn't like my skin color, right? And I run into them in the gas station or at the grocery store, all that person maybe has been longing for the past 2 weeks or 3 months or even 3 years is for somebody to walk up to them and say hello. But if
Mm.
you keep that inside of you, hey, my guy, how far? Like, that's all you need and you'll be fine. But if you bottle it in and you don't share that, oh, that's something I can be dealing with, right? Everybody will assume that everybody is fine. I mean, you dress up in the morning, you go to work, but you just need somebody to say, oh, hello, you know,
Yeah, make you feel
somebody to
seen.
take
Yeah.
you and say, come, let's go to the Nigerian store where they sell Nigerian food. No, let me do something for you. That's all you need, right? But if everybody bottles in, even in terms of the government and the countries and the systems that we come to meet here, if we always act like it's okay. I mean, I was a dentist of 20 years in Ogbomosho, and now I'm living in Saskatoon. But it's okay. I can be a cleaner. It's fine. It's not fine.
Mm.
It
Mm.
affects your mental health. So if you
Yes.
don't speak up, the people there will think you're fine being a cleaner. You're not fine being a cleaner. You're not fine working in a care home when you had a blossoming career as a bank manager or whatever. You're not fine, right? But if we keep acting like we're fine and we don't share these stories, even those systems will not know that they need to change things. Those policies that
Mm.
make it difficult for you to find work in Canada, they will say you must have Canadian experience. They will say you
Mm.
must have Canadian certification. All these things are barriers, are systemic barriers for immigrants to settle. And if we don't talk about them, then even the system doesn't know that there are things that need to change.
Yeah, I think it's good to hear that. And I know a couple of people that have had to leave for Canada, and I believe that they are making headways. Regardless, one thing I'll back a little and talk about uh, three or two of the characters in the book, just so we can also give context to listeners as to what to expect. And I'll speak about Ochania and just when I thought, I kept thinking about the question I was going to ask about her. I saw the artwork behind you, so I was going to ask that, was it a China that painted that?
Nice one, Shay.
But one of the things
Okay,
that I,
he's fascinated by art. What
yeah,
an
so I
artist
was
too,
going to
right?
ask
Nice.
that, what really inspired that character? Uh, so I'm asking because I saw that character evolve, right? I saw that character evolve across, across, well, in Nigeria, based on circumstance. And I would say that thank you for what you did in that book, or that you did not allow Oche to do anything
That
stupid.
rubbish boy.
Thank you for all of the interventions that
Oh,
came
that's
in
been
at
unforgivable.
different points in
Yeah.
time. Yes. So, but again, back to my question, what really inspired, that story? Because it's okay. It's when you look at the story of the main character, one can, walk through it, right? But looking at her own story and how she also started to come into her own, or into herself along the,
Okay.
was quite interesting to see. So yeah, what do you think really made you bringing that character into the book?
I think like young people, like globally, like where do young people go to when they want to be heard? Like if a family of 4 or 5 move from Lagos to Toronto to live, um, chances are that you would hear the mother's experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you would hear the father's experiences. They will share those. Well, the possibility of them being able to share their story or experience is greater than the possibility of knowing what a 13-year-old, like those conversations, like even the conversations parents, or adults would have, that decision, um, how often are the kids involved in saying, you know what, let's move? It's me just thinking that my children don't deserve to school in Nigeria, they must go abroad. Have I did I have that conversation with
With
my
them,
kids to say, look, should we go, or should we, like that decision? A lot of adults would take it on behalf of the young people,
and say we're doing
and
it
then
for our
when the young
children.
people, "Yeah, I'm doing it for it's for your sake, but you've not consulted them to know how they feel.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe Nigerians will be like, why are you consulting a child? Yeah, maybe Canada is starting to change me. So who where does that young person, where does an Ochanya go to get her story told, right? Where does an Ochanya go to explain what she feels in class, how her classmates treat her, what she feels about moving to a new neighborhood? So they're often forgotten this whole conversation around immigration and settling. That demographics is often forgotten. And I thought that it was important that, we bring that up, that we're able to see what it feels like even for her, plus everything that had gone on in Nigeria and then um, moving here. How did she feel? What were her own struggles? And just this morning, interesting, I was talking to a friend, and she told me how she took her kids to the river, like a park actually, and um, she's colored, right?
Yeah.
Is a person of color. So she took her kids to the park, and then somebody comes to her child that is not even a teenager, and says to her child, go back to your country. This conversation took place this morning.
Wow.
Like,
Wow.
go back to your country. And her child was confused. What does this person mean? So I think it was important for me to be able to capture the young people in this whole conversation. And
Yeah.
let's even have that conversation starter, that puts them into consideration when we are having all these conversations about whether to jackpot or not to jackpot. What is their own experience? What is their own encounter with racism? What is their encounter with making friends? What is their experience being forced to imbibe two cultures? Because for the young people who will leave, they see their parents, they talk to their parents, and their parents are sounding very Nigerian, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when they go to school, okay, even say with my kids, right? When I hear them speak to their friends, sometimes I'm like, is that my child? Because when they come home, they speak to me in a different way. And they're forced to maintain that dual personality. When they are home, they will eat gari. When they go out, they eat burger. What does it do for someone when you become two people in one? And I think that's why I built in that character there.
Interesting.
And there's something
Thank you so
about,
much for
and I
doing
hope
that.
this is not a spoiler alert, but Oche, you mentioned, I hope you read between the lines, because somewhere at the end.
Yeah, I'm coming to that.
I'm glad you got that. So let's not talk about it.
I'm coming to So the other characters I was going to talk about I was going to tie it into the place of trust and friendship, right? Because something that may get lost in the story, which was later unraveled, is how there was some sort of betrayal, right? And because there was no reason why that trust should have been broken, whether the one of the parties was dead or alive, right? And do you think this is something that often happens with families, especially I worked in the bank for many years, and I see what happens when someone passes, and there is a need to open up an estate account, or do all of those things to access the funds that the person left behind. And a part of me, first of all, sees how the family even just spends away money that someone has spent all of his life building up, and then in a few days or weeks or even months, he just realized that all of that.
No spoilers, Shay.
Yeah, I'm doing my best not to have spoilers. So that's why I'm creating other scenarios. But again, so what my question is what has been your experience with friendship? What has been your experience with trust? And how did that feed into the story you try to create? Also, there's just one more question after this.
Yeah, I think like when we say drama or intrigue or any of those words or expression we use, this would be like the origin of those things, right? Like even life itself is not linear. Like it's not linear.
Mm-hmm.
Relationships are not linear.
Mm-hmm.
Something happens and then it becomes it then makes life interesting. Um, um, because you don't expect everyone to act the way you do, and even you yourself, you're not perfect.
Exactly.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but yeah, my own personal experiences with situations like that. I'm from I have so many siblings, and even when I was younger, my siblings would come home, and when I was younger then, so I hadn't made that. I wasn't old enough to have that level of friendship or relationship with people. But I would hear my siblings come back home and say, "Oh, remember that my friend that they were stranded and they didn't have anywhere to stay, and I managed to convince mom and dad, and then they came and lived with us. Look at what this person did to me." And you will hear those stories and be like, you gave this person shelter, you gave them bed, you gave them food, you shared your meals with them, and this person did this to you. Again, that's not saying that you yourself, you're perfect, because you too may be doing your own to other people, right? But I think like those experiences in life are real, and we cannot deny that they don't exist. And
Mm-hmm.
a case in point is, even with my experience relocating to a new country, some of the things I thought I was running away from, like office politics, all the intrigue and drama, I thought like when I left Nigeria, I would never confront those. Oh, I'm coming to a new country. They are different. They are different. It's not true. You leave and then you come and you see the same thing. You see betrayal, people lying, all sorts of things that happen, back home in Nigeria. You see those things happening, and there are different human beings who have been raised differently, have different backgrounds, but that tendency to lie, to throw someone under the bus, to try to get ahead, um, to enrich yourself at someone's expense, to like I said, throw somebody under the bus so that you become, if they're out of the way, then I become the supervisor. You see those things happen even here as well. So in that
Yeah, they are
sense,
not location agnostic.
there's no, where you live doesn't absolve you from that sort of drama.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and just that realization about, wow, well, this is human nature. Like, this is human.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought like I would come to Canada and be talking about certain things or writing about certain things, right? But at the end of the day, we are all human. And I left one set of human beings in Nigeria, and I'm coming to deal with a different set of human beings in this new country. Ultimately, they are still humans. And so
Yeah,
they would marry, they will fall in love, they would fall out of love, they would do everything a human being does, right?
yeah.
And I hope
I would
that,
love to read. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I would actually love to read an excerpt of the book that really does justice to all of these things or issues that you've actually talked about, and that will perhaps be page 196. I think the second paragraph. I think it was a conversation between the main character, whose name I'm still not sure of how to pronounce, and Obina. Hopefully, you're going to pronounce it correctly. So there was the main character was agreeing with something that Obina was saying, and he said, the more I interact with people, the more it hits me that many of us have come here from Africa and other parts of the world based on an incomplete or false narrative. And so, when as human beings, we tend to believe that, or when you come into a new place, that some of the ills and, the not so pleasant things that I've experienced in my former place of location, I would not experience it in a new place. I think that's like being totally not realistic because humans will be humans, irrespective of their color, irrespective of wherever it is. And so sometimes it makes sense to kind of like judge from that individual perspective and understand that whether you're white, whether you're black, the heart of man is desperately evil. That makes sense. So, Shay still has one more question, but before you ask your question, Shay, I wanted to find out from Michael why was there an heavy dose of Benue, Makurdi, and the bulk of the main character and the family in question in this book were actually from that part of the world, that part of Nigeria. And for context, Benue is around the middle belt, Nigeria,
Not
and I'm very
central.
sure that you're not from Benue. Is it not central? Yeah, they call them
Yes,
middle.
not central.
Yeah,
Okay, well, you guys,
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah,
yeah,
it was very deliberate and intentional on my part, to have this character come from the middle belt. My last three books, I think I have often, created characters that are from my part of Nigeria.
yeah,
So they're
Niger Delta.
Bayelsa, Ijo, and I've written about those characters. But I like to push myself sometimes, and I thought, no, why
Mm,
don't you go to a part of Nigeria, and create characters, um, and just set this story around, that part of where you are not even from, um, because that
you
way
just
I'm
have to
learning.
travel to Makurdi.
well, I couldn't do that. But I have friends from Makurdi, so I'll just call them on the phone and like, hey, I need to know about this. And
Yeah.
even the names of the characters, like I'm like, okay, give me 5 Benway names of guys, and then they'll give me
Owoicho.
names now. Okay, this one, what just sounds like a good name. Okay, that would be the name, and that was how it all came together. And I wanted to even say when I did the mechanics of Yanagua, you know, that book showed me how important location was, because
Yeah.
when I then now I'm in Canada, and I make friends from all over the world, and
Yeah.
they've read mechanics of, some of them have read mechanics of Yenagua, and they went and Googled, so they know where Yenagua is. So I'm like, oh
Yeah.
wow, I didn't know that this was this was an unintended consequence of doing that. So I'm like, you know what, I can shine the light on how many novels really, and all of you are, both of you are avid readers, Toby and Shay.
Yeah.
Like, how many books have you read that are set in Makurdi?
Yeah, I agree. I've been to Makurdi once, yeah, and every single part or elements you mentioned sounded very familiar. And yeah, kudos to you for actually doing that. And that's one of the beautiful things that we would love to spotlight, or the reasons we do what we do at the Word Reading Podcast. It's an avenue to let people in and let them know that there's an entirely vast universe out there. There's a world out there that is worth exploring outside of your current or outside of Europe or the UK where you're based, and just to open their eyes up to beauty and culture in Africa, whether it's in Nigeria, and even the mere fact that I've met my colleagues at work that are non-Africans, and I begin to tell them that actually, even though I'm African, right? I'm Nigerian. Like, Africa is a continent. Like, it's like saying you're European, whereas you're actually British. And so when you begin to want to break down all of those levels and nuances to them, it's hard for them to understand. But it makes sense that even for me as a Nigerian, I'm getting to open myself up to some of this culture that were unfamiliar. So yeah, thank you so much for doing that. My other question, since Sheyi isn't what's the name here, is maybe I was going to ask about how you manage to infuse a few other foremost contemporary African authors. Like I saw you mention Ukamaka, Olisakwe, and then the classic what's the name, Bright Price by Buchi Emecheta, and one could tell that you were trying to infuse your love for African literature through the character of Ochanya. I hope I got that pronunciation correctly. So it would make sense to hear from you some of the your biggest influence as a writer. Like, so what are those books that really, really rub off on you and actually have helped you to build your craft, or even build make your writing prowess better than what it used to? So,
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Growing up, like even when I wasn't like old enough to read those books, because like I said earlier, I had older siblings,
mm,
and so I was exposed to reading James Hadley Chase,
yeah,
Harold Robbins, Sidney Sheldon. Like, I read those books when I was really young, because my older
hmm,
siblings would bring those books home. So I was kind of influenced by, books like that. And of course, by the time I started doing literature in school, I
hmm,
then became exposed to, Nigerian authors, Buchi Emecheta. I really love her
yeah,
and the way she writes, and
yeah,
other
huge
Nigerian
fan.
writers as well. And I know now, because I mean, like, some years back, I would never have imagined that. The other day, someone sent me a voice note from the UK, and it was white people discussing my book. And I was like, hearing white
Look at
people
that.
putting the names and talking about the story like they really got into it. So I would never have
Mm,
imagined, maybe 10 years ago, I get DMs from people in Ghana, all of, like, places saying, oh, come to our book club, or, and
yeah,
like, I never realized how far Well, you imagine it, right? You want it to happen, but when it happens, it
Mm.
hits you differently. Like, oh, for real, somebody in Jamaica is reading Mechanics of Inagua. Like,
Yeah.
and so I realized that that book is a marketing tool,
Yeah.
not just for myself, the author, but for anything I choose to speak about.
Yeah.
Um, so by mentioning Ukamaka,
Yeah.
like I'm really impressed. Like you picked that up. And maybe if you have
Oh
never
yes.
read her before, you might go and look for her book and be like, who is this person
Yeah.
Michael?
Yeah.
Let me look for her book.
Fantastic writer. Yeah.
Is that a real person? Let me look for the book
Mm.
and read it too, that sort of thing. So now more than ever before, I realized that this book is a marketing tool. Like one day I was in, just went out with a friend here in Saskatoon, and then we went to this store where they sell old books. And
Mm.
my friend was like, Michael, come, 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 come. My book was there. Like, how on earth? Like,
Wow.
imagine that I would walk into a used old bookstore in Canada and I would see my book. And that book might end up in someone's hands.
Yeah.
What portrayal of myself and my culture and my country is
Yeah.
in that book? Because I didn't realize
Yeah.
when I was writing that book how far it would travel. But now I know,
Mm.
so every book I write is an opportunity for me to be positive. And like, even
Mm.
though I know, even with Leave My Voice in Saskatoon, some bad things happen, but those bad
Yeah.
things are to make us reflect. Ultimately, I'm saying I wish Nigeria would be better. When you ask that question about what other messages do you want, like what other messages are in this book, for me, it's a longing and a hope and a dream for Nigeria to be better, so
Yeah.
that somebody like Sheyi, who has vowed never to Japa,
I don't know if I mentioned.
doesn't have to
I don't know if I
Japa.
mentioned that it was a vow, Sha, but
Okay. No comments. Uh, oh, lawyer. She is not lawyer either. All of us are just thinking a better life for, I don't know. But this has been really interesting. Shay, now you can um give your other question a go.
yeah, it's just I'll call it the final question, right? I was going
Yeah.
to ask if there's going to be a sequel because there was mentioned about
Kilo
the end of
Toku,
the book.
what's left?
No, there was something you mentioned at the end of the book, the arrival of Uche.
I didn't see that part too.
You
Sorry,
missed
Oh
guys.
it.
yeah,
You missed
the
it.
arrival of Uche, and I'm like, okay, this is a new story entirely.
Wow.
So
Wow.
are we saying,
Who
are
was
you
on that
building that?
comment?
So the reason why I'm asking, not just because of Uche, but because you led us on, and then you just sort of hurried us of the book, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
there
the
are
ending
there are
felt rushed
there are many
actually. Like so
linkages
much happening.
that occurred between the bulk of the book and the tail end of it. So we want to know either what happened or what will still happen. So yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
And you think
you're
Michael is
right.
going to tell us that?
You're right. We need to know. We need to know. There's so many things we need to know. We need to know more about Sowoicho. We need to know about Oroma. Like, okay, what's that dynamics? We need to know about um, about
Oroma
Big Bay,
Soshegesha. Hi.
and that whole situation. But like
Mm,
me, when I write, I try to bring my readers in the journey with me and allow them write their own ending. Like I leave it to imagination to fill in the gaps, um, and and give it the ending that you want. You know. So, am I promising a sequel? I've promised a sequel for Mechanics of Yanagwan. I don't want to promise a sequel for Leave My Bones in Saskatoon just yet.
Amazing. I, I personally feel that the book ended the right way. I love how it ended. That's like what I would love to say. It, my only other bias perhaps would be the fact that I felt like a lot was just happening at the end, and it almost felt like, oh, let's bring it to a close. It's about time that it actually ends and all of that. So, good one with that. I'm glad you asked that question, anyways, and I'm so shocked that I missed out on that Uche part, like what actually happened on that bit. Hopefully, I take another dive at the later chapters of the book and discover what it was. So this has been a super, super exciting conversation. Um, I totally had enjoyed every single minute of reading this book. And there's this thing myself and she typically do, right? We would love to rate every single book that we discuss on the podcast, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how many stars or what would you rate this book? Hmm. For me, I I honestly felt like after the last book that we reviewed or that we discussed on this podcast, I wanted something very easy, something relatable, and this actually did that for me. And on that basis, I'm definitely going to like hmm. I don't know whether to be generous or to be that bad lecturer in a Nigerian university and say, "Oh, time is for the gods." It is for me. I know, but I really feel that because it's a relatable read, it's a timely one. I would definitely rate it a an 8/10 for me, and I honestly can't wait to hear what she has to say about it. Like, how many stars, or on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate Leave My Bonus as? Um, A.
Yeah, I think that for me, I will do an 8.
Yay, that's a good one. 'Cause I was pretty very skeptical about what she used. Yeah, I was very skeptical about what she used perception about the book would be, and I saw myself, highlighting, marking some part of the book, which is very, very interesting. I only do that for books that I actually enjoy, and so yeah, kudos to you for that one. And I was going to ask that you do sort of like a pronunciation exercise where you perhaps pronounce the names of all the characters for the benefit of those who kind of like struggle with the intonation or perhaps the enunciation of all of those words. So I've got Onjefu, who happens to be the brother. Do you want to correct me if I'm wrong? Do you want to try that?
I'm not Benway myself, so
Okay,
I'm not sure about my accuracy, but Jeffo is correct because
okay.
yeah, the friend one of my friends who helped me with the names for the book is actually on Jeffo himself. So
Oh, nice.
yeah,
Yeah,
this is me. That's
we
his
were sure of
middle
that.
name.
Okay, great. And then there's Owocho or Owocho,
Owoicho, Owoicho.
Owoicho. Okay, noted. And then the daughter's name is Ochanya.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, great. And then I had here new prospective girlfriend is Oroma. Is that
Orom.
right?
So Oroma is actually
And
Ikwere.
Igbo name.
That's Rivers.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And then I felt it was going to be unfair not to mention the kids, the twins, and the other boy. I don't want to mention what happened to them. So Onalekwe, did I get that correctly?
Onalegu.
Okay, Onalego, and then there's Okopi, is
Yeah.
that right?
Okopi, yeah.
And then there's Ejuma.
Mm.
or is it Ijuma? Yeah,
Ijum,
Ijuma.
Ijuma.
Ijuma. Right. Great. Yeah, I think that's it. Ene is quite easily understood or pronounced. Then there's Obina and Uche and Bingwe. Yeah, interesting names. Loads of characters that are quite memorable that will perhaps stay with the readers for quite some time. And yeah, that's it. So on that note, I really want to say a very big thank you to every single person that tuned in. Thank you so much for joining us. Michael, it's been really exciting getting into your mind and getting to know what actually inspired this. Thank you so much for sharing openly and for all of the food for thoughts that you left us with. I definitely believe that both of our audience or listeners also will be taking home with them some very important lessons. So a very big thank you to you for that one. And on that note, we will be calling it an episode. I hope you join us again for episode 5. We will let you know what we will be discussing then by either checking us out on Instagram to see what we'll be discussing or on Twitter. And please make sure to share this particular episode with your friends, your family, subscribe, leave us some comments and rating, and we really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time. And that's it. I'm going to pause for a bit. I'm not going to stop the recording because we want you to do like a short intro for like 30 seconds to say, "Oh, hi guys, thank you so much." Not necessarily thank you, but I was just on the What Reading podcast with Toby and Sheyi, discourse, blah blah blah. Then maybe something else to intrigue people and make them to want to. That would be part of what we do. Feel for this. Yeah, so I'm just going to count you in 3, 2, 1.
Hi everyone, this is Michael Afenfia, and you may know me from the Mechanics of Enegua, Rain Can Never Know, or more recently, Lead My Boats in Saskatoon. And yeah, here live and direct with Shay and from What We Did podcast. And I urge you to join us, listen in, and be a part of the family.
Thank you so much for that. I really wanted to thank you one last time again. Time. This was really an insightful conversation. I hope you enjoyed every minute of having this chat with it. And we hope that when we call you again, the next big book, you will honor our. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I really feel honored. And I think someone from my team or so may have even contacted you guys earlier about
Oh,
being a part of this podcast. I don't know if you saw that email. So I'm happy to do this. And I've already started conversations. Like, happy for everything, like, even with Roving Heights and stuff.
mm,
Started having conversations with Ibiso, paperwork, um, to do some in-person reading in Nigeria,
lovely.
the first or second quarter, definitely. Um, so we're trying to
Interesting
set
call.
that up. Yeah, trying to set that up for next year, early next year. Definitely would love to work with you guys in a way that's possible.
Yeah. We'll definitely be more than happy to host you either at our Abuja or Lagos stores. Um, I don't know if you've ever had like a book reading stores.
I haven't even been to any of your stores really.
Oh no, yeah, we've got two spaces in Lagos. We've got one at Surulere and one at Landmark Victoria Island. And then in Abuja, we are two locations as well. We are Wuse 2 and Garuki. And the Garuki store is like our biggest store yet, so there's more than enough space for book events, and it can sit about 7 to 8 people. And then in Lagos, most people kind of like tilt towards the islands, so they do Landmark quite close to Hard Rock Cafe and easy for people. I'll definitely be in touch with so you let me. More than happy to host. I'm sure you have lots of fans in Nigeria that cannot wait for you to sign their book and even ask you a lot of questions about mechanics of Yanugwa and of course this, and kudos to Miss Ibiso for believing so much in your heart and for really, really supporting. Because I see all of the work that she's putting actively promoting was part of what I saw that made me feel that no, I couldn't actually say no to her. We needed, yeah, big thank you to her, and I hope you sent my regards and best wishes to her as well. Thank you so much for your time again. Really, really, really appreciate it.